After I became a millionaire, my husband's behavior finally made sense. The realization didn't arrive with fanfare. It came on a Tuesday morning in our Boston penthouse, while I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching fog roll across the harbor. My coffee had gone cold in my hands. The city below was waking up, taxis honking, construction crews assembling, the distant wail of a ferry. But inside our marble and glass sanctuary, there was only silence, the kind of silence that feels like held breath. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Like this video so this story reaches more hearts. And subscribe for the next journeys. I had everything I'd ever worked for. The tech company I'd built from nothing had just been acquired for $47 million. The press called me a visionary. Forbes put me on their cover. My mother cried when I showed her the check. But standing there that morning, watching my reflection in the glass, expensive silk robe, diamond studs Michael had given me for our anniversary, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Michael was still asleep. He'd come home late again, smelling of bourbon and something else I couldn't quite name. Not perfume. Something institutional. Clinical, almost. When I'd asked where he'd been, he'd smiled that gentle smile of his and said, "Just drinks with the guys from the firm." His law firm. The one he'd been at for 12 years, climbing steadily toward partner. Except I'd stopped believing that months ago. The signs had been there all along, I realized. The way he'd grown quieter as my company grew louder. The way his congratulations felt like apologies. The way he'd started leaving rooms when I took business calls, his shoulders tight with something I'd mistaken for stress. I'd told myself he was proud of me, that he was adjusting. That success took time to settle into, even second-hand success. But that morning, standing at the window, I remembered something that made my stomach drop. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been working late in my home office when I heard him on the phone in the bedroom. The door was cracked. His voice had been low, urgent. I'd caught only fragments. "I can't keep doing this. She doesn't know. It's getting harder every day." My hand had frozen on my keyboard. The obvious conclusion had crashed over me like cold water. An affair. It had to be. What else could explain the late nights, the distance, the guilt that seemed to coat every interaction between us? But I hadn't confronted him. Instead, I'd buried myself deeper in work. Closed another funding round. Hired 50 more employees. Let the noise of success drown out the whisper of suspicion. Now, with the acquisition complete and nowhere left to hide, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I turned from the window. Behind me, our penthouse stretched out like a museum of our life together. The art we'd collected, the furniture we'd chosen, the wedding photos on the mantle showing us younger, laughing, uncomplicated. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of building a life. And somewhere along the way, while I was building an empire, he'd started building something else. I needed to know what. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my CFO. Board meeting at 9. They want to celebrate. Champagne breakfast? I typed back. I'll be there. But I wouldn't be celebrating. Because as I looked at Michael's jacket draped over the dining chair, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A laminated badge clipped to the pocket. Not his law firm ID. Something else. The logo was partially hidden, but I could make out part of the text. General Hospital. My heart began to pound. Why would my husband have a hospital badge? The board meeting felt like performance art. 20 executives in Italian suits, toasting my success with Veuve Clicquot and praising my vision while I smiled and nodded and felt like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. The conference room on the 42nd floor had views of the Charles River, all that expensive glass framing a perfect autumn morning, but all I could see was that hospital badge. I excused myself early, citing exhaustion. No one questioned it. The newly minted Millionaire deserved rest. I drove home through Cambridge, past Harvard Yard where Michael and I had met 13 years ago. I'd been a graduate student in computer science, working 3 jobs to pay tuition. He'd been in his second year of law school, confident and kind, with a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He used to wait for me outside the library at midnight, holding coffee, asking about my coding projects like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. "You're going to change everything," he'd said once, his hand warm around mine as we walked through falling snow. I can feel it. And I had changed everything, just not in the way either of us expected. Our penthouse was empty when I got home. Michael had already left for work, or wherever he actually went during the days I thought he was at the law firm. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the space like I was seeing it for the first time. His side of the closet, his nightstand, the small details of a shared life that suddenly felt like evidence. I opened his nightstand drawer slowly, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Inside, a moleskin notebook, a Mont Blanc pen I'd given him for his birthday, reading glasses, a bottle of prescription medication. I picked up the bottle, Zoloft, for anxiety. Prescribed 6 months ago by a Dr. Patricia Chen at Massachusetts General Hospital. My hands went cold. 6 months ago was when everything had started shifting, when the late nights began, when the distance grew. When he started looking at me with that expression I couldn't decode, something between guilt and tenderness, and something else I hadn't wanted to name. I opened the moleskin. His handwriting covered the pages, neat and small. Not a journal exactly. More like lists, schedules, appointments. Tuesday 3 p.m., Dr. Morrison. Thursday 11 a.m., group session. Friday 2 p.m., Dr. Chen follow-up. And then, on a page dated 2 weeks ago, tell her soon. She deserves to know. But how do I explain what I've been hiding? The book slipped from my hands. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. An illness he hadn't told me about. A gambling addiction. A double life I'd been too blind, too busy to see. The hospital badge, the medication, the appointments, the guilt. My phone rang. Michael. I stared at his name on the screen, my heart hammering. Then I answered. Hey. His voice was soft, familiar, and suddenly unbearable. How was the board meeting? Fine, I managed. Where are you? A pause. Too long. At the office. Depositions all afternoon. Right. My voice sounded strange even to me. Will you be home for dinner? Another pause. Probably late. Don't wait up. I closed my eyes. Michael? Yeah? Are you happy? The question escaped before I could stop it. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, what kind of question is that? An honest one. Emma. He sighed, and in that sigh I heard everything. Exhaustion, sadness, resignation. Can we talk about this later? I really need to... Sure, I said. Later. I hung up before he could say goodbye. The apartment felt enormous around me. 4,200 square feet of luxury and secrets. I walked through it slowly, seeing our life with new eyes. The grand piano he used to play but hadn't touched in months. The bookshelf full of legal thrillers he'd stopped reading. The kitchen where we used to cook together on Sundays, laughing over burnt risotto and cheap wine, back when we had nothing but each other. When had that stopped? When had we become 2 people living parallel lives under the same expensive roof? I found myself back at the window where the morning had started, watching the city settle into afternoon. Somewhere out there, Michael was doing something I couldn't see, living some truth I didn't know. And I was here, surrounded by the success that was supposed to make everything better, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. I barely recognized her. I didn't sleep that night. Michael came home past midnight, moving quietly through the dark apartment like he was trying not to wake me. I lay still in our bed, eyes closed, listening to him undress in the bathroom. The water running, the medicine cabinet opening and closing, the soft click of a pill bottle. When he finally slid under the covers beside me, I felt the mattress dip with his weight, felt the heat of his body so close and yet impossibly far away. I wanted to roll over, to demand answers, to shatter the careful silence we'd been building between us for months. Instead, I kept my breathing steady and even, playing the role of the sleeping wife while my mind spun through everything I'd found. The hospital appointments, the medication, the notebook full of secrets. Tell her soon. She deserves to know. What could be so terrible that he'd rather lie than tell me? The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I followed him. He left at 8:30, kissing my forehead absently while I pretended to read emails on my laptop. "Have a good day," he said, his hand lingering on my shoulder for just a moment. There was something in his touch, a hesitation, a sadness that made my throat tight. "You too," I whispered. 20 minutes later, I was in my car 3 vehicles behind his Tesla, feeling like a character in a bad movie. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't me. I'd built a $47 million company on trust and transparency. I'd led teams, negotiated with investors, stood on stages and talked about integrity. And here I was, following my own husband through Boston traffic like a stranger. But what choice did he leave me? He didn't go toward the financial district where his law firm was located. Instead, he headed north, toward Cambridge. My pulse quickened. Maybe he was meeting someone. Maybe this was the moment I'd discover the affair, catch him walking into some apartment building with flowers or guilt written across his face. But he drove past the residential streets, past Harvard Square, and pulled into the parking lot of Massachusetts General Hospital. I parked across the street, my heart in my throat, and watched him get out of his car. He stood there for a long moment, his hand on the door, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. Then he walked toward the main entrance, that hospital badge clipped to his jacket, and disappeared inside. For 20 minutes, I sat frozen in my car. Around me, the city moved normally. People walking dogs, students on bicycles, a mother pushing a stroller. Life continuing like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. My husband was going to a hospital, regularly, while telling me he was at work. The possibilities crashed over me in waves. Cancer. Some terminal diagnosis he was facing alone. Maybe he was trying to protect me, didn't want to burden me when my career was finally taking off. Maybe all those late nights were treatments, appointments, scans. Maybe the distance wasn't rejection, but sacrifice. Him pulling away so it would hurt less when he was gone. The thought made me physically ill. I grabbed my phone, pulled up his contact, my finger hovering over the call button. Just ask him. Just demand the truth. But something stopped me. The memory of his voice on the phone weeks ago. I can't keep doing this. She doesn't know. It's getting harder every day. If he was sick, if he was dying, wouldn't he have said, "I can't keep hiding this"? The words echoed differently now, weighted with something I couldn't quite grasp. I put the phone down. Instead, I got out of my car and walked toward the hospital entrance. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to understand. The lobby was bright and clean, full of purposeful movement. Doctors in white coats, nurses consulting tablets, visitors clutching flowers and worried expressions. I stood near the information desk, scanning the directory board. Oncology, cardiology, neurology, emergency medicine. Where would he go? What department held the secret that was unraveling our marriage? "Can I help you?" A volunteer with kind eyes and a pink vest approached me. My voice caught. "I'm looking for someone. My husband. He comes here for appointments, but I don't know what department." She smiled sympathetically. "Do you have his name? I can check our system." Michael's name. Right there on the tip of my tongue. One word and I could know everything. But something made me hesitate. The way he'd looked that morning, his hand on my shoulder, the sadness in his touch, the weight of whatever he'd been carrying alone. "Never mind," I heard myself say. "I'm sorry. I must have the wrong hospital." I turned and walked out, my heels clicking against the polished floor, my reflection following me in every window. Outside, the October air was sharp and cold. I stood on the sidewalk, watching people come and go through the automatic doors, each one carrying their own private crisis, their own hidden pain. My phone buzzed. A text from my attorney. "Congratulations again on the acquisition. When can we schedule your wealth management consultation?" Wealth management. As if managing money was the hardest thing I had to manage right now. I drove home through blurred streets, not really seeing anything. The penthouse was still empty. I walked through room after room, touching surfaces that suddenly felt temporary. The dining table where we'd celebrated my first investor meeting. The couch where we'd fallen asleep watching movies. The bed where we'd whispered promises about forever. Had he known then? Had he already been carrying this secret when he kissed me? When he told me he was proud? When he held me through the anxiety attacks that came with building something from nothing? I found myself in his closet, standing among his suits and ties and the expensive shoes I'd bought him when my company went public. Everything neat, organized, the life of a successful attorney on display. But tucked in the back, behind winter coats, I found something else. A canvas tote bag with the MGH logo. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, more notebooks, brochures, pamphlets with titles I didn't understand at first. And then I did understand, and the understanding hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about cancer. This wasn't about dying. This was about something else entirely. Something that made every conversation, every strange moment, every careful distance suddenly rearrange itself into a pattern I hadn't seen coming. "Oh, Michael," I whispered to the empty closet. "What have you been going through?" But I still didn't have the full picture. Not yet. Just pieces of a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The brochures stayed spread across our bed where I'd left them, their glossy pages catching the afternoon light. I couldn't stop staring at them. Couldn't stop reading the same words over and over, trying to make them fit into the marriage I thought I knew. Support groups for family members. Understanding mental health treatment. Living with depression. A guide for loved ones. Depression. Not cancer. Not an affair. Depression. But why hide it? Why the secrecy? The lies about where he was going? The guilt that seemed to coat every interaction between us? People got therapy. People took medication. This was 2023. Mental health wasn't the stigma it used to be. I would have understood. I would have helped, wouldn't I? I sat down on the edge of the bed, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Would I have understood? Or would I have been too busy, too focused on funding rounds and product launches and proving everyone who doubted me wrong? How many times had Michael tried to talk to me in the last year, and I'd cut him off with, "Can we discuss this later?" Or, "I really need to finish this presentation." How many times had I chosen my company over my husband? My phone rang. Michael again. I stared at his name, my finger hovering over the decline button. Then I answered. Emma. His voice was tight. Where are you? Home. Where else would I be? Your car. He paused. Your car was parked across from Mass General this morning. I saw it when I was leaving. My stomach dropped. Michael, were you following me? His voice cracked. Not angry. Worse than angry. Devastated. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Yes, I finally whispered. I was following you. I heard him exhale, long and shaky. How long have you known? Known what? I don't know anything. That's the problem. My voice was rising now, months of confusion spilling out. You disappear for hours. You lie about where you're going. You have hospital badges and medication I never knew about. You're keeping secrets, Michael, and I don't understand why. Because I'm ashamed. The words exploded from him. Because I'm supposed to be the strong one. Because while you're out there conquering the world and making millions and being brilliant, I can barely get out of bed some mornings. Because I'm broken, Emma, and I didn't know how to tell you that your success was killing me. The world stopped. What? I breathed. No, God, not like that. I didn't mean it like that. He was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. I'm so proud of you. I am. But watching you succeed while I fell apart, I started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. I'd sit in partner meetings and feel like I was suffocating. And you were so happy, so alive, and I couldn't be the person who dimmed that light. So you just disappeared? You let me think you were having an affair? You thought I was having an affair. His voice broke completely. Jesus, Emma, I thought you were too busy to notice I was drowning. The words hit me like a slap, because they were true. All of it was true. I'd been so consumed with building my empire that I'd missed my husband falling apart. The late nights I'd assumed were drinks with colleagues were therapy sessions. The distance I'd interpreted as resentment was actually him trying to protect me from his pain. The guilt in his eyes wasn't betrayal. It was shame. I'm coming home, he said quietly. We need to talk. Really talk. I should have done this months ago. Michael, wait. But he'd already hung up. I sat there holding my phone, the brochures scattered around me like evidence of my failure. Not as a wife exactly, but as a partner. As someone who was supposed to notice when the person they loved most in the world was suffering. 20 minutes later, I heard his key in the lock. I was still sitting on the bed, unable to move, unable to process the wreckage of everything I'd misunderstood. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loose, his face pale and exhausted. He looked at the brochures, then at me, and something in his expression crumpled. You went through my things. I was trying to understand. And do you? Understand? He leaned against the door frame like he needed the support. Do you understand what it's like to watch your wife become a superstar while you can't even make it through a Tuesday without wanting to disappear? To smile at dinner parties while investors tell you how lucky you are, how you must be so proud, and all you can think is that you're worthless by comparison. You're not worthless. That's not how it feels. He walked into the room, sat down in the chair across from the bed, keeping distance between us. It started about a year ago. Small things at first. Trouble sleeping, loss of appetite. But then you got that second round of funding, and suddenly you were everywhere. Bloomberg, TechCrunch, that profile in Wired, and I was just Michael, the lawyer husband, the +1 at your events. You never said anything. How could I? His eyes met mine, and they were full of such raw pain that I had to look away. You were flying, Emma. Finally getting everything you deserved after years of struggle. How was I supposed to tell you that your success was triggering my depression? That every award you won felt like evidence of my inadequacy? That's not rational. I know it's not rational. He stood abruptly, started pacing. That's what depression is. It's not rational. It's a voice in your head telling you lies that feel like truth. And I tried to fight it on my own. I did, but it got worse. And finally I went to see Dr. Chen, and she diagnosed me with clinical depression and put me on medication and referred me to a therapist and suggested support groups. Why didn't you tell me? He stopped pacing, turned to face me. Because I saw how you looked at weakness, Emma. At work, with your employees. That guy who couldn't handle the pressure, you let him go without a second thought. That investor who showed doubt, you cut him out of the next round. You're brilliant and driven and unstoppable. And I thought, his voice dropped to a whisper. I thought if you knew how weak I really was, you'd stop loving me. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling out until they touched every corner of our relationship. Every missed dinner, every distracted conversation. Every night I'd chosen my laptop over his hand, reaching for mine in the dark. I would never stop loving you, I said. But even as I said it, I wondered if he could believe me. If I'd given him any reason to believe me in the past year. You don't understand. He ran his hands through his hair. The day your acquisition was announced, I was in a group therapy session. While you were on CNBC talking about your vision for the future, I was in a circle with 8 strangers talking about why I couldn't find the will to live anymore. The room tilted. Michael, I'm better now. The medication helps, the therapy helps, but for a while there, he looked at me with eyes that had seen something dark, something I'd been completely blind to. Emma, there were days I didn't want to be here anymore, and you never noticed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. All I could see was the chasm between us, the one I'd helped create with my ambition, my focus, my assumption that success would make everything else fall into place. I'm sorry, I finally whispered. I'm so sorry. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected the apology, but didn't know what to do with it. I know you are, but sorry doesn't change the last year. It doesn't change the fact that you've been living one life while I've been barely surviving another. So what do we do now? He looked at me for a long moment, and in his eyes I saw all the love and pain and disappointment of 8 years together. I don't know, Emma. I honestly don't know. We didn't speak for the rest of that evening. Michael retreated to the guest room, and I stayed in our bedroom, lying on top of the covers fully clothed, staring at the ceiling while the city lights painted shadows across the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him in that group therapy session, surrounded by strangers, talking about darkness I'd never bothered to notice. How had I become this person? The woman who could negotiate million-dollar deals but couldn't see her own husband falling apart. Who prided herself on attention to detail, but missed every sign that the man she loved was suffering. Around 3 a.m, I got up and walked to the guest room. The door was ajar. Michael was sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed, staring at nothing. The lamp cast soft light across his face, and I could see the exhaustion etched into every line. Can I come in? I asked quietly. He looked up, surprised, then nodded. I sat beside him, leaving space between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just honest, raw in a way we hadn't been in months. Tell me about the therapy, I finally said. Not because I'm interrogating you, because I want to understand. He studied my face, looking for something. Then he sighed. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays. Dr. Morrison is my therapist. We talk about triggers, coping mechanisms, the roots of the depression. A lot of it goes back further than I realized. My dad, the way he pushed me, the law firm, the pressure to make partner, and then your success, which became this mirror showing me everything I wasn't accomplishing. But you've accomplished so much, not compared to you. He said it simply, without accusation. That's what the depression does, Emma. It takes reality and twists it. Dr. Morrison calls it cognitive distortion. I'd see your face on a magazine cover, and instead of feeling proud, I'd feel like I was disappearing, like I was becoming irrelevant in my own life. I absorbed this, feeling the weight of it. The group sessions? Fridays. Men dealing with depression, anxiety, feelings of inadequacy. At first I felt like a fraud. What did I have to be depressed about? Beautiful wife, good job, nice apartment. But then I realized that's exactly the trap. Thinking you don't deserve to be depressed makes the depression worse. And the medication? Zoloft. Took about 6 weeks to start working. The first month was rough. Nausea, insomnia, this weird disconnected feeling. But now, he paused. Now I can actually feel things again. Not just the darkness, actual feelings. It's like someone turned the color back on. I felt tears sliding down my face. I should have noticed. I worked very hard to make sure you didn't. He finally looked at me. I got good at performing normalcy, smiling at the right times, saying I was tired instead of saying I was drowning. I'd schedule my therapy appointments during work hours and tell you I was at depositions. The group sessions were late nights at the office, and I built a whole alternate reality so you could stay in yours. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Why protect me from this? Because watching you succeed was the only good thing in my life for a while. His voice cracked. Even though it hurt, even though it made me feel small, seeing you happy gave me a reason to keep going. I couldn't be the person who took that away from you. I couldn't be the weight that pulled you down. But I was supposed to be your partner, in everything, not just the good parts. Were you, though? He said it gently, but the words still cut. Be honest, Emma. If I'd come to you a year ago and said, I'm struggling, I need help, I need you to slow down and focus on us, would you have? Or would you have told me you'd make time after the next funding round, after the product launch, after the acquisition? I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. Because he was right. I would have promised to make time. And then I wouldn't have. Because there was always one more meeting, one more crisis, one more opportunity that couldn't wait. I built my dream, I said slowly, and lost sight of ours. We both did. He took my hand, the first physical contact we'd had in hours. His fingers were warm, familiar. I stopped fighting for us too. I just gave up and retreated into my own private hell. Instead of telling you I was struggling, I hid it. Instead of asking for what I needed, I convinced myself I didn't deserve to need anything. We sat like that, hands linked, both of us staring at the wall. Outside, an ambulance siren wailed past. Life and death and crisis, all happening simultaneously in a city full of people fighting their own battles. The worst part, Michael said quietly, was the day of your acquisition announcement. You called me from the lawyer's office, so excited you could barely speak. And I was happy for you, genuinely happy. But I was also sitting in my therapist's office, and we'd just spent an hour talking about whether I should check myself into an inpatient program because the suicidal ideation was getting worse. My hand tightened on his. Michael. I didn't, obviously. Dr. Morrison and I developed a safety plan instead, but that's where I was, and you had no idea. You came home that night with champagne and talked about all the things we could do now. travel, buy a house in the vineyard, finally start trying for kids. And all I could think was, how do I tell her that I can barely make it through today, let alone plan for tomorrow? You could have told me. Could I? He looked at me, really looked at me. You were incandescent, Emma, literally glowing with success. How was I supposed to dim that light with my darkness? I thought about that moment, tried to see it from his perspective. Me, champagne drunk on success, spinning dreams about our future. Him, freshly medicated, freshly terrified, trying to hold himself together while I painted pictures of a life he couldn't imagine living. I'm sorry, I said again, knowing the words were inadequate. I'm sorry I wasn't present. I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't be honest with me. I'm sorry I created an environment where success mattered more than suffering. It's not all on you. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I made choices too. I chose to hide. I chose to lie. I chose to protect you from reality instead of trusting you with the truth. Why now? I asked. Why did you decide to tell me? I didn't decide. You found out. He smiled sadly. But honestly, I think part of me wanted you to find out. That's why I left the badge visible. Why I kept the brochures where you might see them. I was too scared to tell you directly, but I was tired of lying. What do we do now? I asked. How do we come back from this? He was quiet for a long time. Then, I don't know if we can come back. Maybe we need to go forward instead. Different than we were before. What does that look like? Couples therapy, for one. Dr. Morrison recommended someone. And honesty. Real honesty, not the performative kind where we say we're fine when we're not. He paused. And maybe you need to figure out who you are when you're not building empires. Who Emma is when she's not the CEO, the visionary, the success story. The words should have stung, but they didn't. Because he was right. I'd built my entire identity around achievement. Without the company, the investors, the press, who was I? Did I even know anymore? I'm scared, I admitted. Of what? That without all of that. I gestured vaguely at the walls, the expensive furniture, the life we'd built. You won't have any reason to stay. He turned to face me fully, his eyes searching mine. Emma, I fell in love with a graduate student who ate ramen and coded until 3 a.m. and laughed at her own terrible jokes. The money, the success. I'm proud of what you've built. But that's not why I married you. Then why are you so unhappy? Because I lost you to it. He said it simply. The woman I married would have noticed I was struggling. Would have put down her phone when I tried to talk. Would have chosen us over one more late night at the office. He was right. And the truth of it sat heavy in my chest, a weight I'd been carrying without acknowledging. I want to be that person again, I whispered. I want to find my way back to us. Then we start there. He squeezed my hand. But Emma, it's going to take work. Real work. Not just promises, but actual change. Can you do that? I thought about my calendar, packed with board meetings and investor calls and opportunities I'd fought so hard to create. Thought about the identity I'd built, brick by brick, achievement by achievement. Thought about what it would mean to dismantle some of that to make room for something else. Yes, I said. I can do that. And for the first time in months, I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked almost like hope. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I turned off my phone. Not on silent, not on do not disturb. Off. Completely off. Michael watched me from across the kitchen counter, coffee mug halfway to his lips, surprise written across his face. "What are you doing?" "Taking the day off." I set the phone down like it might explode. My hands were shaking. "I'm taking the day off, and we're going to spend it together. Really together. Emma, you have the board presentation this afternoon. They can wait." The words felt foreign in my mouth. Dangerous, even. But also liberating. For once, they can wait. We drove to Walden Pond. It was October, midweek, and the parking lot was nearly empty. The water was glass smooth, reflecting clouds and bare branches in perfect mirror symmetry. We walked the trail in silence at first, just the sound of leaves crunching under our feet and distant bird calls echoing through the trees. "I used to come here," Michael said quietly, "when it got really bad. Before the medication started working, I'd drive out here and just sit by the water trying to remember what it felt like to be okay." I slipped my hand into his. Did it help? Sometimes. Other times it made it worse. All this beauty, and I couldn't feel any of it, like watching life through frosted glass. He looked at me. The depression was like that. Everything muted. Even you. We found a bench overlooking the water and sat down. An elderly couple walked past, holding hands, moving slowly but purposefully. I wondered how many years they'd been together, what crises they'd survived, what secrets they'd learned to share. "I called Dr. Morrison this morning," I said. "Made an appointment for us. Couples therapy. Tuesdays at 6. Michael looked at me, something shifting in his expression. "That's when you usually have your executive team meeting. I moved it to Wednesdays." "Emma." "I'm serious, Michael. I'm serious about this. About us." I turned to face him fully. "I know I can't fix everything overnight. I know actions matter more than promises. But I need you to know that I heard you. Really heard you. And I'm choosing differently." He nodded slowly, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "Thank you." We sat there for an hour, maybe more, just talking. Really talking, the way we used to before my company consumed everything. He told me about the group sessions, the other men struggling with depression, the shared stories that made him feel less alone. He told me about the panic attacks in partner meetings, how he'd started making excuses to skip them, how the senior partners had noticed and started questioning his commitment. "I might not make partner," he admitted. "At this rate, I probably won't. How do you feel about that?" He considered the question, watching ripples move across the water. Relieved, actually. Terrified, but also relieved. The pressure to make partner was part of what broke me. Maybe it's time to consider other paths. Like what? I don't know yet. That's part of what I'm working through in therapy. Who I am beyond the trajectory I set for myself at 25. He smiled faintly. Dr. Morrison says depression can sometimes be a sign that your life doesn't fit anymore. That some part of you is trying to force a change. I thought about my own life, the empire I'd built. Did it fit? Or had I simply gotten so good at wearing it that I'd stopped noticing how it chafed? We stayed until the sun started lowering in the sky, painting the water gold and amber. On the drive back to Boston, Michael's hand rested on my knee, and for the first time in months, the silence between us felt comfortable, connected. That night, I opened my laptop to check emails and found 47 unread messages, 12 missed calls, 3 texts from my CFO marked urgent. The old Emma would have panicked, would have spent the next 3 hours responding, apologizing, putting out fires. Instead, I closed the laptop. "I need to tell you something," I said to Michael. We were in the living room, him reading, me supposedly working. "Something I've been avoiding." He looked up, marked his page. "Okay." "The acquisition. It wasn't just about the money or the success. It was about proving something. I took a breath. My father never believed in me. Said I should get a teaching degree, something stable. Said tech was for men who understood how the world really worked. When he died 2 years ago, I hadn't spoken to him in months because of a fight we had about my company. Emma, let me finish. My voice was shaking. I built this whole empire partly to prove him wrong, to show him, even though he's gone, that I was right and he was wrong. And somewhere along the way, proving became more important than living. Winning became more important than being happy. Michael set his book aside and came to sit beside me. You were enough without proving anything. I know that now, or I'm learning it. I leaned against him. But I think that's why I couldn't see you struggling. Because if I'd slowed down, if I'd stopped pushing, I would have had to face the fact that all of this, the success, the money, the validation, didn't actually fill the hole my father left. And you were right there, suffering, trying to tell me something was wrong, and I couldn't hear it because I was too busy building monuments to my own pain. He wrapped his arm around me. We both built monuments. Mine was just made of silence instead of success. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the gathering darkness. No phones, no distractions, just us and the truth we'd finally started speaking. The following week, we started couples therapy. Doctor. Sarah Brennan had an office in Brookline, filled with soft furniture and boxes of tissues strategically placed on every surface. The first session was excruciating. All our failures laid bare, examined, dissected. But Dr. Brennan had kind eyes and a direct way of speaking that made it impossible to hide behind politeness. You're both grieving, she said during our second session. Emma, you're grieving the fantasy that success would heal old wounds. Michael, you're grieving the person you thought you'd be by now. And together, you're grieving the marriage you had before ambition and depression rewrote the script. Can we get it back? I asked. No, she said bluntly. You can't get back what was, but you can build something new, something more honest. So we started building, slowly, imperfectly. I stepped back from some board responsibilities, delegated more to my executive team. Not completely. I still loved my work, still believed in what we were creating. But I learned to leave it at the office, to come home and actually be present. Michael started exploring other career options. He talked to a friend about teaching law at a local college. Started playing piano again, the sound filling our apartment with something that had been missing. We had dinner together, real dinner, with phones in another room, conversations that went deeper than, how was your day? We went back to Walden Pond on Sundays, walked the trail, talked about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, we started finding our way back to each other. 3 months after that terrible Tuesday morning, I came home to find Michael at the piano, playing something I didn't recognize. He looked up when I walked in, and his smile was genuine. Not performative. Real. How was work? He asked. Good. Closed the partnership with Adobe. I set my bag down, kicked off my heels. But that's not the important part. No? I walked over to the piano, sat beside him on the bench. The important part is I left at 5, turned down drinks with the team, came home to you instead. He played a soft chord, his shoulder touching mine. How did that feel? Terrifying, I admitted, but also right. He kissed my temple, then went back to playing. I closed my eyes and listened, feeling the music vibrate through the bench, through my body, through the space we were slowly learning to share again. But there was still one more thing. One final piece I hadn't told him yet. Something I'd discovered during my own therapy sessions. Individual ones I'd started with a Dr. Lisa Chen, recommended by Dr. Brennan. "Michael," I said quietly, and something in my tone made him stop playing. "There's something else. Something I need to tell you about why I couldn't see you struggling. About what was really happening while you were falling apart." He turned to face me fully, and I saw worry flicker across his expression. But also trust. After months of honesty, painful conversations, and slow rebuilding, we'd earned that trust. "What is it?" he asked gently. And I knew it was time. Time to share the last secret. The one that would finally make everything, all of it, make complete sense. I took his hands in mine, feeling their warmth, their steadiness. After months of therapy, of learning to be honest, this final truth felt both impossible and necessary. "I couldn't see you struggling," I said slowly, "because I was struggling too, just differently." Michael's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The year you started having panic attacks, the year you started therapy, that was the same year my company exploded. The funding rounds, the press, the pressure. Everyone saw success, but what they didn't see was me having panic attacks in my office, not sleeping, taking medication for anxiety that I never told you about because I thought I had to be strong, perfect, unbreakable." His grip on my hands tightened. "Emma, let me finish." My voice was shaking now, but I pushed through. I was prescribed a Xanax for the panic attacks, started seeing my own therapist. But I hid it all because I thought if you knew I was struggling too, if you knew the success was costing me my mental health, you'd ask me to slow down. And I couldn't slow down because slowing down meant facing the fact that I was burning out, that the empire I was building was crushing me under its weight. "So we were both drowning," he said softly. "Both hiding it, both trying to protect each other by suffering alone." "Yes." Tears were streaming down my face now. "And that's why your behavior finally made sense after I became a millionaire. Because once the acquisition was done, once I'd achieved everything I'd been chasing, I finally had space to breathe, to look around, to see you. And what I saw terrified me. Not because you were struggling, but because I recognized it. The late nights, the medication, the therapy you were hiding. I'd been doing the same thing." Michael pulled me close, and I felt him trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "The same reason you didn't tell me. Shame. Fear. The belief that my struggle would diminish your pride in my success. But here's what I finally understood. What Dr. Chen helped me see." I pulled back to look at him. "Your depression wasn't caused by my success. It was happening parallel to my anxiety. We were both breaking under different pressures, both hiding our pain, both so focused on protecting each other that we stopped actually connecting with each other. The irony," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is that we could have helped each other if we'd just been honest." "I know." I wiped my eyes. "That Tuesday morning when I saw your hospital badge, when I followed you to Mass General, I wasn't just trying to understand your secret. I was confronting my own, because I'd been to that same hospital. Different department, different doctor, but the same building, the same shame, the same fear of being seen as weak." He stared at me, processing. "You've been in therapy?" "For 18 months. Dr. Lisa Chen. She specializes in high-achieving women with anxiety disorders." I laughed bitterly. "I scheduled my appointments during investor meetings. Got very good at lying about where I was going. Sound familiar?" "God, Emma." He pressed his forehead to mine. "We're a pair, aren't we?" "We are." I closed my eyes. "And here's the thing I finally realized. Your behavior made sense not because you were hiding something terrible, but because you were surviving the only way you knew how. Just like me. We both built walls around our pain. We both performed normalcy while falling apart inside. We both loved each other enough to suffer alone rather than burden the other person. That's not love, Michael said quietly. That's martyrdom. I know that now. I opened my eyes. Real love is messy. It's saying, I'm struggling, and trusting the other person to hold that truth. It's being weak together instead of strong apart. We sat there at the piano, holding each other. Two people who'd nearly lost everything because they were too afraid to be honest. The apartment around us felt different now. Not a monument to success or a museum of secrets, but just a home where two imperfect people were learning how to really be together. Dr. Brennan was right, I said eventually. We can't go back to what we were, but maybe what we're building now is better. Two people in recovery, Michael said, a small smile playing at his lips. Learning to be honest about their medications, their therapists, their bad days. Learning that vulnerability isn't weakness. Learning that success doesn't heal old wounds. Learning that we're enough, I finished. Even on the days we're not okay. He kissed me then, soft and gentle, and it felt like the first kiss in years that wasn't shadowed by secrets. When we pulled apart, he was crying too. I'm sorry I hid from you, he said. I'm sorry I hid from you too. Where do we go from here? I thought about it. Forward, honestly, together. 6 months later, we were back at Walden Pond. Spring this time, everything green and alive. We walked the same trail, but we were different people now. People who knew each other's medication schedules, who attended each other's therapy appointments when invited, who could say, I'm having a bad day, without shame or apology. Michael had left his law firm, started teaching at Boston College Law School, and I'd never seen him happier. The pressure to make partner had lifted, replaced by the joy of shaping young minds. He still had bad days. Depression didn't just disappear, but he managed them with tools, with honesty, with a partner who actually saw him now. I'd restructured my role at the company, bringing in a COO to handle day-to-day operations. I was still involved, still passionate, but I'd learned that success without sanity was just another form of failure. My therapist and I were working through my father issues, slowly peeling back layers of achievement seeking that had nothing to do with actual desire and everything to do with proving myself to a dead man. We sat on our favorite bench overlooking the water, my head on his shoulder, his hand in mine. Do you ever regret it? I asked. The year we lost to secrets? Every day, he said honestly. But I'm also grateful for what it taught us. What's that? That marriage isn't about protecting each other from pain. It's about facing pain together. That honesty is harder than performance, but infinitely more valuable. He squeezed my hand. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're not okay. I thought about the millionaire I'd become, the woman who'd achieved everything she'd set out to achieve. The press still wrote about me, investors still called, but none of that defined me anymore. What defined me was this. Sitting by a pond with my husband, both of us medicated, both of us in therapy, both of us finally, honestly, trying. After I became a millionaire, I said softly, I finally understood that the richest thing I owned was never the money. It was having someone who knew all my struggles and loved me anyway. It was being that person for someone else. Michael turned to look at me, his eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been in years. I love you, Emma. The real you. Anxiety, ambition, achievements, and all. I love you too. Depression, doubt, dreams, and all. We stayed until sunset, watching light dance across water. Two people who'd almost lost each other learning to hold on. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but honestly. Finally, truly, honestly. And in the end, that honesty, that brutal, beautiful, terrifying honesty, was what saved us. Because after I became a millionaire, I learned that my husband's behavior finally made sense not because he was keeping a terrible secret, but because he was keeping the same secret I was. That success and suffering can coexist, that achievement and anxiety are not opposites, that you can be breaking and building simultaneously. His depression wasn't about my success. It was about the invisible weight we all carry, the pressure to seem fine when we're fracturing. And my inability to see it wasn't about being too busy. It was about being too afraid to acknowledge that I was fracturing too. We were two people hiding the same truth in different ways, performing strength while drowning in silence. And the moment we stopped performing, the moment we let our walls crumble and our truth spill out, that was when we finally found each other again. Not as the perfect couple with the perfect life, but as two imperfect people brave enough to be broken together. And that, I've learned, is the truest kind of wealth there is. If this story touched you, leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for the next journey.